Hi, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and this video is a continuation of the Foundations of Genocide series of videos that I'm doing. Before I actually begin the discussion, I want to make a correction to the last video. In the last video, I said that I was going to display some information in video 15. I said that I was going to display some information on the legal committee's acknowledgement of genocide in 1946, right? The December 11th, 1946 decision. I read it, but I forgot to put the information up. So in this video, I'm going to read it, put the information up, so that, you know, if you're taking notes, following along, you can write the information down. It's a lot easier to write it and pause the screen than to try and write it while I'm reading it. So this is just to sort of clarify that from video 15. So I'm going to begin with that, and then I'll start today's lecture. So genocide is a denial of the right of existence of entire human groups, as homicide is the denial of the right to live of individual human beings. Such denial of the right of existence shocks the consciousness of mankind, results in great losses to humanity in the form of cultural and other contributions represented by these human groups, and is contrary to moral law and the spirit and aims of the United Nations. Many instances of such crimes of genocide have occurred when racial, religious, political, and other groups have been destroyed entirely or in part. The punishment of the crime of genocide is a matter of international concern. The General Assembly, therefore, affirms that genocide is a crime under international law, which the civilized world condemns, and for the commission of which principals and accomplices, whether private individuals, public officials, or statesmen, and whether the crime is committed on religious, racial, political, or any other grounds, are punishable. Invites the member states to enact necessary legislation from the prevention and punishment of this crime. Recommends that international cooperation be organized between states with a view to facilitating the speedy prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide, and to this end requests the Economic and Social Council to undertake the necessary studies with a view of drawing up a draft convention on the crime of genocide to be submitted to the next regular session of the General Assembly. Okay, the point in reading that sort of out of its original context was just so that I could display the information, because I forgot to display that previously. And with that, let's get rid of that and begin today's lecture. Okay, in today's lecture, again, we're going to be continuing the discussion on the foundation of genocide. Today's lecture, particularly what I have planned, is that I want to talk about the role of ideas, right, and ideology. We're going to talk about what ideology is, what ideas are, what the process of ideation is, and so on. In contemporary cinema, I just over the past weekend watched Inception, which was completely amazing. And the whole sort of basis for the movie is this idea of ideas, right? What is an idea? How do we come to understand ideas, so on and so forth. I happen to study ideas for a living, and the development and sort of unfolding, the progression of ideas, the transition from one idea to another, and so on. As a profession, what I want to do specifically in this lecture is to sort of, not entirely, target the discussion around sort of the foundational idea of genocide. We have a better understanding of what genocide is from the past two series, the past 15 videos that have been up. In this next series, in the lectures that I'm doing right now, what I want to do is to introduce some of the seminal terms and definitions surrounding the nature of genocide, because in subsequent videos, instead of having such an introductory feel to it, in class I call it ghetto philosophy, right? You sort of, before you jump right into the jargon, you tell a narrative, you tell a story, and introduce the idea slowly. But now, you know, the ball of snow is starting to accumulate a little bit more mass. It'll speed through a little bit quicker, and as such, I'll be referring to jargon, technical terms, and it's not very complicated jargon at all, but I'll be referring to technical terms that refer to concepts. in order to do that, you need to be introduced to these ideas. You need to be introduced to these terms. You need to be introduced to these concepts, so that when I say these words, you'll have an understanding of what it is that I mean when I'm saying it. I don't want to lose you as an audience. So, enough of the disclaimer. Let us begin continue our discussion on the foundations of genocide. All right. So this is. Okay, so this is a continuation of our discussion of the foundations in genocide. Today I'm not going to talk about historical sort of situatedness of the discussion. That was the last series of videos. What I want to get into now is sort of the conceptualization of genocide, right? Primarily, genocide has been a field dominated, and not in a negative sense, right? But it's primarily been a field dominated by lawyers and historians, right? Lawyers sort of have legal implications. They understand sort of how genocide is codified both domestically and internationally, so lawyers factor very heavily into, and rightfully so, right, very heavily into discussions of genocide. Historians have that masterful sort of narrative, holistic narrative that accounts for comparative accounts, seminal accounts, descriptive accounts of sort of the unfolding of genocide within its historical narrative. I am neither a lawyer nor a historian. I'm a philosopher, so really the only tool that I have is logic, right? And what I'm going to do as a philosopher in genocide is introduce you to some of the logic of genocide. I'll do that in the second half, and I'll do that with a very rudimentary discussion of Venn diagrams, and we'll look at some Venns. I've done other, outside of the genocide discussion, videos on symbolic logic and modal logic, but we're going to keep it very, very simple, nothing nearly as complicated as symbolic or modal logic. We're going to talk about genocide with respect to Venn diagrams. One, because I think it's a very good visual tool for you to have an understanding of the scope of genocide, and the inclusion, right, of genocide, what it includes, what it doesn't include. But also, I think it's a great way of introducing you to just the concept of Venn diagrams to begin with. So it's like a two-for-one, right? You get to learn a little bit about Venns, you get to learn a little bit about sort of the scope of genocide analysis. But before we do that, as I said, let's begin this discussion on sort of key concepts. Now, I'll be introducing more and more key concepts as I go through and refine my lecture notes, but here we go. So the first term that I want to introduce is ideation. I-D-E-A-T-I-O-N, ideation. And all these definitions are definitions that I've sort of created. It's not the sort of Merriam-Webster traditional account of the terms. I've tried to describe the terms in its relationship to the idea of genocide scholarship. So these are a bit specific in their definition. I've defined ideation as the ability to conceptualize an idea to create an idea, right? The ability to conceptualize an idea to create an idea. So ideation is the ability to conceptualize an idea to create an idea. Right? Ideation is the ability to conceptualize an idea to create an idea. And basically all we're thinking about when we're talking about ideation, it's very simple. It's sort of like this, right? This is the person, and the person has an image in his or her head. The perceiver has this image box with a square X with a box around it, and I create the idea X with a box, right? So, for example, the example that I always use in class. Imagine that I have an idea in my head, and I want to communicate this idea to you, right? And this is where the movie was really cool. I'm not going to get into this, but because I don't want to spoil the movie. It has really nothing to do with the movie, but I thought it was cool. This is amazing. I'm in my office in Fort Lauderdale. You are wherever you are in the world watching this video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to prove to you right now that ideas, these things which really are the only thing that I can think of that's like fundamentally intangible, right? They don't exist. You can't measure them. You can't weigh them. There is no empirical basis to it. It's not like the mind. It really doesn't have any sort of quantifiability, an idea. I'm going to communicate an idea to you, hopefully very, very clearly.